constitutes the public record that we're required to provide to you. Obviously, the project plan is the key document. We have made one change since the body had the organizational meeting, and that was to remove the potential for the district to cost share in potential street improvements or stormwater improvements. Other than that, the plan remains the same. I just wanted to make a couple brief remarks, and then I'll certainly entertain any questions that the members may still have regarding the plan or the project. And I know throughout the various meetings in the process, there's been, I guess, this confusion about this idea of an operating entity and a real estate entity. And as we had explained at the organizational meeting and at the public hearing in the village board, it's important to remember that the TIF assistance that is set forth in the project plan is being provided to the real estate entity because that is the improvements that will actually generate tax increment. While the operating entity will be making a significant investment as well, that's all tax exempt. So there will not actually be a revenue stream. So while there's a gap on that side as well, the TIF assistance is not going to fund any portion of that operating entity. So a few more remarks on that. We had explained also at that meeting that it is unusual that we would look at the operating entity for a variety of reasons. And, you know, maybe a good analogy that I won't take credit for, but I think helps to kind of frame this a little better is, you know, let's say you're an investor and you're looking at buying a piece of commercial property. So what you would be interested in would be the returns from the rents on that commercial property. If there was, for example, a Papa John's that was one of the tenants, you wouldn't be looking into the operations of the tenant to figure out whether or not it made sense to make that real estate investment. So, you know, that's, I think, a way to understand the separation. And the other thing is, while it is unusual that we would be asked to look at the operating side, which is a difficult task to do, it's not unusual at all for a business that owns its own real estate to hold those in two separate entities. So in that regard, the way Octopi is set up is what would be typical. Now, one thing granted is you've got common investors in both the real estate operation and the operating entity. So we understand that that is a little bit different. But one of the things to remember too is that with the TIF assistance, the real estate aspect of this project only gets to marginal returns of less than 2%. And it's really the fact that, again, you've got an operating entity and a real estate entity that even makes that scenario palatable, because if you were purely looking at it as a real estate investment deal, most people would not be willing to deploy their capital to gain a less than 2% return. And I think one thing that is also worth noting is that when you look at the history of Octopi in the village to date, and this would have been through the existing TID number 3, the village's participation in public investment has totaled to $560,000. So when you think about that in comparison to the level of private investment, it's a pretty small aspect. And similarly with the project as proposed currently, when you look at the entire investment that would be made within the amended TID number 9, the TIF funded portion of that represents less than 3% of the total investment. And I think the point worth noting there is that I think the company has shown that it's looked to TIF, as the sort of the last resort and sort of the final source available to plug a gap after exhausting other options. So compared to other projects we've looked at throughout the state, certainly the amount of TIF assistance as compared to the overall private investment being made is relatively small here. So I just wanted to make those comments as some points of clarity based on the prior discussions, both at the JRB as well as the other public meetings related to this project. And I'll stop there.
Okay, sounds good. So what I'll do is, if anybody has any comments they'd like to make or questions they have for Todd or any of our guests, Isaac, excuse me, we'll do so at this time. So if you have any comments or questions, please raise your hand. Dave Betcher, go ahead.
When looking at the sheet on the cash flow projection, it had it highlighted the projected TID closure was in 2030, but it's showing payouts in 31 and 32.
That's
Am I misreading something?
no, that's correct. So if you look at the far right-hand column where it says MRO principal outstanding, so what that means is we would have accumulated enough cash in the fund balance such that the payments we show on the MRO in 2031 and 2032 could be prepaid in the year 2030.
Okay.
So that's how you're able to close 2 years earlier than the payment schedule. Think of it as like paying off debt early would be an analogy.
If we're looking at doing that, what's the reason for opening the TID to 2039 then? Why not having it close within like 3 years after that date or 4 years after, like we see in a lot of them?
Well, whenever we put a project plan together, we show the projections for the full statutory life of the district. So the district could run out till 2039, but this indicates we would project closure 9 years earlier in 2030.
So can we make a TID set up with a closure date earlier than 2039, or is it automatically to 2039 statutory?
That's statutory.
One of the problems we've had a bit with is that once we open up a TID, that the joint review, our board here, no longer has any say over how that money kind of goes. So for example, if we got to 2031, say, this TID could be left open by the village and use it to pay other TIDs for another 10 years, right? And it would not come here again.
Under current law, any district can be a donor to a district that's either a blighted area TID or a TID in need of conservation or rehabilitation, but that requires that the project plan of the donor district be amended. So it does in fact come to the JRB for approval.
Okay, so if it was decided for, say, example, TID, what's open right now, 2, or is it 3? That needed more money for road improvement or whatever, it would have to come back here before it would be left open to move money from here to there. Is that correct?
To move it from one TID to another?
Right.
Correct, except in cases where there's already a share in place, which
Right.
is, the case with TID number 2. But a prospective share that has not yet been approved by the JRB would require JRB approval.
And the share would have to be between the named 2 districts. So in other words, even though there's a share going to two now, you couldn't take any other district and automatically start moving it, correct?
Correct. Any sharing amendment. So if you've already got a district that's a donor, like TID number 2, and that's a bad example because it's already past its expenditure period, so you couldn't even do this. But let's say it wasn't. If you wanted to now be able to shuttle increment from TID 2 to say, TID 8, you would have to first go to the JRB to get approval.
Okay.
Could I jump in with one other clarification, Dave, to Dave's question about TID closure and when TID closure is required? Todd, if a district is open and has fulfilled its obligation and is just, a TID just can't remain open and keep building increment without any projects, can it? Is there a restriction as to that it actually has to close at some point early?
A TID should be closed at the point, well, obviously if it reaches its maximum life, or at the earlier point where it's accumulated enough dollars, like in this example in 2030, that can pay off its remaining project costs. Now, to just elaborate a little more to your point, Todd, I mean, if a district is still in its expenditure period, and you maybe still have unfulfilled projects, you might choose to keep it open simply to make further expenditures. But if there's nothing else in the plan that was identified as a need, or if you've reached the end of the expenditure period where you can no longer incur new costs, yes, you would close the district at that point in time.
So for this particular TIF, we haven't identified other projects beyond the scope of this, the increment sharing as part of incentive to occupy. That's the only identified project. In fact, the language is limited. That doesn't demonstrate other projects, right?
Correct.
Okay. So Dave, I think there's a lot in this project plan that is going to constrain that closure expectation as we've kind of laid it out here. That's my take, at least.
I do appreciate that the road stuff was removed so that the project is more clear as to what it was about. I'm still a little concerned over the fact that really this is a very new project compared to what this TID was originally written for, which would have required 2 public hearings, and we're doing it in only 1. By saying it's the same TID, even though it's an extremely different project than the first TID was originally created for. But that said, our school board policy is very clear about our but-for test. And I still have the issue that the but-for test in this case could apply to almost any single business doing an addition. And I don't know, Todd, has there been anything presented showing that they were denied a loan, or any documentation stating that they would be denied a loan? Or is it just the projection of the value that we assume the loan would be denied?
Well, I think a representative of Octopi would be better to speak to that. But, one thing to bear in mind, they've not been denied a loan. They're going to be getting bank financing. But when you go through that underwriting process, the bank, just like if you're buying a home, they're only going to lend you so much money. So where TIF normally comes in is when, you've essentially maxed out the amount that the financial institution is willing to lend you, and any other sources. And then that ends up being the gap that you fill with TIF. But sure. I'd let Kate or Isaac speak to that further if they choose.
So Kate or Isaac, I guess the question is, have you been presented something to this document showing the gap that the financing said that would be there?
Yeah, our main banker sent an email last time basically stating how TIF was necessary for this project to continue. And I think it was shared in the last commission and read out loud. I can send it again to Tracy if you want to read it.
Oh,
Okay.
but and that was, whoops, I'm sorry. That was Isaac's description of the letter is just about that. the State Bank of Sun, or what is it? Sun Prairie State Bank?
Bank of Sun Prairie.
Bank of Sun Prairie indicated that for their loan as they proposed, which is included in the prospectus here that's been reviewed by Ellers, for that to be awarded, they're requiring TIF contribution. Now, they didn't say, I'll be clear, exactly what that dollar amount needed to be, what magic number had to be hit to satisfy the bank's parameters for awarding the loan. But that's why we called upon Ellers to evaluate the figures related to the deal to make sure that those constraints seem to be met in their professional opinion, in Ellers' professional opinion.
Oh, so you're saying that those documents were presented to Ellers, but they're not in the document we're seeing?
Yeah, Todd, do you want to go over the process by which that information is between the business and Ellers?
Well, since it's confidential information, it's transmitted to us directly, and then we analyze that and just provide summary analysis to public bodies, since it's not customarily, information that would be out in the public domain.
So just to elaborate on that, Octopi provided to Ellers the full operating statement for the real estate entity, as well as plans for financing it, which include the loan that we're talking about that would be underwritten with the assumption of this level of TIF, and then the other sources of financing that Isaac and his team are seeking. So full financial projections for this are reviewed, but to Todd's point, they're summarized because it's confidential information, and you lean on your consultant with Ellers to review that for you.
And that's how we derive those investment returns with and without TIF.
I guess, when I think about that, it's, this is a public process, and the public expects us to do due diligence and everything, and they look at what we look at. And, if you just look at this document, it says that there's a loss of profit or revenue, depends on how you want to feel. You say about that almost 2% at the beginning of the document. But there's a statement in here that they wouldn't get financing, but of course, there's nothing in there showing they wouldn't get financing. And we're basically being asked to vote on saying they can't get financing. And if you see that document, Todd, I get that. And to say it's confidential information, I kind of get that. But as you could see, if you took this document and you went to almost any other business in Waunakee and said, we're going to do an addition, and it's not going to generate rental revenue if we rent it out. The profit margin's too low. It kind of gets back to that question again of, are we giving money just to get a profit margin? No, we're giving money because there's some expectation that bank financing would not be available, or there's a shortfall in bank financing, but we don't see any documental proof saying what that number is, or from anyone other than basically the owner saying, I don't get enough financing. And I get that may be the case, and I don't doubt it very well likely could be the case. But I basically have to sit in front of people who voted for me and say, well, the document implies it. And they go, well, where's a bank denial letter? Well, it's private. They don't have to provide that. Did you see it? No, because it's private. They didn't have to provide it to me either. But I had to vote yes on the idea that it exists. And I get there's probably no way for you to get around it either. But by using the concept of rental property for a manufacturing facility, maybe that's the only way you can look at it. But when we look at other facilities, they were based on that item. We didn't do the TID for was it Renew Air? I'm sorry, what was the?
Yep, that's it.
Renew Air. We did that based on their idea of number of jobs, their idea of their product and selling and everything, not on treating their warehouse as a rental property. And so that's what it was looked at. And I understand you can set up corporations to rent property to yourself because that's how taxes are done. But when we're looking at the idea of giving or relieving someone of a property tax burden, a person building their own home who's a taxpayer, and we say, we have to raise your taxes a little bit because we're not going to put taxes on this entity over here. So our levy has to be divided more onto you. You're going to take a little bit of a hit for it. And they go, well, what if I put an addition on my house? I can't rent it very well. I would never recover the money on it, and I would take a loss. We're not going to give them their property tax money based on them expanding their house. And in the sense of the but-for test on this one, I'm still kind of back where I was without a document saying they can't get their financing and just having to assume they can't get their financing. It's hard to support that. I do really appreciate the effort on reducing the thing about the roads not being included anymore. But based on our policy at the school board as it's written now, I'll still be voting no. But we understand that the TID will get approved. I'm hoping in the future, one, we can look at this more in depth rather than basically how fast this was. And Chris, I really hope we'll work together more in the future about looking at a TID before it sits in front of us, asking for it to be voted. And I know we've talked about that before, and with COVID and everything else going on, nobody's getting to everything they want to get to. But I want to explain why I'm voting no. I'm not voting no because I am against octopi. I'm not voting no because I'm just against TIFs in general. I mean, I voted for 2 of them. So it's just about the way our policy is written and how we look at the but-for test. This one just doesn't fall within the range of what we normally discuss.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Appreciate all your comments and your sentiment, and you're right. We need to talk more about things in general, not just this, but other things as well. So open communication is always going to be a positive thing. Others, since I can't see you, Adam, did you have any comments or questions that you wanted to make?
Not really. I'm just listening to the comments everyone else is making and observing that. Whoa, were there any comments from the public at previous meetings?
There was, yes, there was several comments. I mean, it depends on which side of the fence you're on. There were both positive and pros and cons raised by individuals, I would say.
Okay. That's all I was wondering.
I don't want to quote anybody because it's not in front of me. I don't want to put words in somebody else's mouth. So I think that's a dangerous thing to say. But I would say there were several people that were spoke against, and there were several people that spoke for. So,
Okay.
Todd, you were in those meetings. Would you agree with that assessment? I mean, I'd say I had more emails that were for, but comments, it was pretty even, I think. Todd Taves, would you agree with that? I mean, you were in the meetings.
I would agree.
Okay. Okay. Lori, any questions or comments? Jim Ellicroak?
Just one question. Assuming that the TID is approved, will construction start soon? And by that, I mean, is it financing for the operational part of this project finalized? I know there's some applications for money through WIDA or some other places that are going to help with the operation. Has that all been finalized?
No, we're honestly waiting on the TIF. TID. If that gets approved, we're going to push hard to close on our financing, and the expectation is to start building Q1 of next year.
Okay.
And then just a comment, nobody's taking our word for it. We submitted full financial statements to the village and Ehlers. They have all the backup. We've always been transparent and completely open with everything we're doing here. There's no hiding or trying to take my word for it. That's not how we operate, or we've been operating from day one. And I think like honesty and being completely transparent has been key to our relationship and our growth with the village. And that's the way we approach every single interaction with the village every single time.
Oh, Isaac, I want you to understand, I wasn't implying what you had or hadn't provided on any sense of that. It's the fact that, and maybe this is something got to try and look more into about the confidentiality of the stuff presented to Ehlers and what a person who has to vote on it can see and can't see, because I can't see the letter you provided. And as such, when I get asked about it, I can't say what was there and what wasn't. I can't speak to it because I don't get to see it. And that's maybe something I should talk with Steve at the school district and look into a little bit about how can I see and vote on something like that without going over the confidentiality. I mean, at the school board, we can do closed session on a contract. Here we can't. So that presents a bit of a layer that's difficult to deal with.
Completely understand and I agree.
Okay, I mean, my comments would be, I've been in support of this for the most part except for right at the beginning, and it's the same question that David has probably, and that's the but for, just making sure that the but for was met. David also brought up a couple of the other things within Renew Air that this project does provide, and that is more employment within Waunakee. This organization, Isaac's built from just a couple people up to 100 employees already. That's a great thing, a great symbol of what our original TIF did do with this, was get that started. And I just think this is a good thing for the community. I think that it's going to be a big tax generating thing for us all the way through. All of our entities are going to benefit from this in the long run. In the short run, the property's been sitting for a long time, generating very little or very little tax revenue. And it was in a TIF, and we even had another company that we provided TID. This TID was originally featured for. And so I think, Jim, your question is a good one about when are they planning to start? Because we didn't ask that question actually with Tormach when this was originally done. And that didn't turn out so great. Isaac is stating that this is going to be happening in the next year. And you know, that's a great thing. So we're going to take a property that's been sitting generating zero for us in our constituents, for that matter, and really help out from a tax break. And I like the fact that it's a short TID. To David's question before, you know, I don't see this as being one that's going to be extended, with the exception of, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but if we were to look at for our lower income affordable housing, we could extend this one by a year at the end of its life too, if we wanted to do that, specific to that purpose. David, that's the only thing, and it would be for 1 year only. And you may have heard us talk about that with one of our other TIFs as well. So, that's kind of my feelings on this, and I do think it's a good thing for our community, from not only job expansion but tourism, to bringing people to our community and having our community exposed. Frankly, getting the exposure it does with all the cans and everything that go around the country. You don't see very many things that come out of Waunakee that say made in Waunakee, Wisconsin. I think that's a cool thing. There's many communities out there that would love to have Isaac in their community and would want him to be there. You know, I talked about this openly, you know, that, yeah, we're not talking about $100 million, but we are talking about $100 million investment from Isaac and his side. For this into our community, and there's not often opportunities within communities that you get that. That said, I still struggled at the beginning with the but-for test, and I feel that it is meeting that. I think it is a little bit loose, David. I think that our legislature above us could probably tighten that for us. I think they've let it be open for too long from what TID was originally supposed to be for with our blighted areas. That's obviously a change within that. I think everybody would agree that it's made it kind of an evil thing to me, in that it makes it very competitive for those that are using it. We heard at our last meeting about Middleton being, I think, at 16%. They're exceeding the 12% rule by a significant amount. You know, we're not anywhere close to that ballpark of using TID and TIF for that. So I guess that's where I'd wrap my comments up at this point. Do we have, is it a motion that we need to make at this point, Todd?
There's a resolution that was provided, which is the next agenda item.
So we don't need to do anything with this. We can just go right to the next? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So that would be then did anybody else have any other comments? I don't want to move on without giving people opportunities. Okay. Adam, I'll just go back to you because I can't see you.
I'm doing good. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. All right, then we'll move on to number 5 then, which is consideration and possible action on resolution approving the project plan and boundary amendment of tax incremental district number 9. So with that, I think we're at a point where we would make a motion to approve or not to approve. And do we have somebody that would like to make a motion?
I'll motion to approve the resolution.
Okay, so we have a motion by Lori Grigg. Do we have a second? We have a second by Jim Leverkrog. Any other comments or discussion? Adam, I don't see you, so do you have any more comments or discussion?
No, I'm doing good. Thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to our vote. Caitlin, roll call vote, please.
Madison College,
Yes.
Dane County,
Yes.
Jim Elvacroak,
Yes.
Village of Waunakee,
Yes.
Waunakee School District.
No.
Motion passes.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody again for your participation and going through this process. And we'll obviously need to adjourn at this point, but as we need any additionals in the future, if we have any changes going in within this, we will let you know. And I just look for a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Dave Vetcher to adjourn.
Second?
Second by Lori Grigg. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. Caitlin, stay safe. Everybody as well. Caitlin, go ahead with our vote.
Village of Waunakee,
Thank you.
Yes.
Waunakee School District,
Yes.
Madison College,
Yes.
Dane County,
Yes.
Jim Elvacroak.
Yes.
You're adjourned.
Thank you,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Yeah.